Hello and welcome to a millinery hat making video. My name is Ilona, I'm a milliner based in London, and today I'm living out my 1930s lady journalist look dreams by following a tutorial from this book, Contemporary Millinery Hat Design and Construction by Sophie Beale. I've got Sophie's permission to share with you all her tutorial on the upcycled straw hat. So with all that, let's gather the materials and get started. I specifically wanted to follow a tutorial from the sustainability chapter, and when I spoke to Sophie, she said that that was her favourite section in the whole book as well. I have chosen the upcycled straw hat tutorial. The reason I've chosen this one is because recently in a charity shop I came across this stunning green hat. Now, it doesn't look like anything much at the moment, does it? It's a little bit battered, it's a little bit old lady-like, and the brim is all misshapen, but the straw is incredible quality. Look at the fineness of this weave. This is a very fine vintage parasisal straw, and it's even got just enough stiffness, so I might not even need to add any more stiffener to this, but we'll see how we get on later. This vintage parasisal sun hat has been transformed into a chunky trilby style. I like that description of a chunky trilby style. I don't tend to wear fedora or trilby styles, but this looks a little bit 1930s to me, and I think that currently in modern fashion we're seeing some elements of 1930s bias cut drapey dresses coming in, so a hat like this is going to be perfect for the upcoming seasons. Before I even dive into the equipment and materials listed, I want to dismantle everything that is from this hat. And for that, I've got my lovely wooden handled seam ripper here, which gives it a nice long handle so it's comfortable to hold. Take that label off first. Here's something interesting about old vintage hats. You wouldn't necessarily have paid as much attention to invisible stitching in a hat like this. As you can see, the petersham ribbon is just sewn on with a very long, almost kind of like a basting stitch or a running stitch. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. That's just a very quick way to get a ribbon into a hat, and why not if you're trying to save time? Because I don't have any green ribbon of this colour that would match this hat, I'm going to try and salvage the ribbon that's here so that I can reuse it in the remake of this hat. To freshen up this ribbon, I will give it a very quick hand wash in some warm soapy water and leave it to dry. I'll need to do the same for the ribbon on the outside. Let's take off this very sorry looking flower. It looks like it would have been potentially a daisy or something like that. I do like the dip dye edges on the leaf, that's very pretty. The stamens are very pretty with the little red ends picking up on the red from the leaf. I wonder if the flower would have been a little more green to start off with, and then the yellow has faded and left it with a kind of grey-blue. This is a very interesting way to use petersham ribbon as a hat trim. This is 3 bits of petersham ribbon of about 15mm wide, sewn together. As for the edge of the hat, it does have a wire in it. Now that I've stripped the vintage hat for parts, let's see what other things we need for this tutorial. The pre-owned straw hat. Number 5 petersham ribbon. Sophie says that she has used number 3, or you may want to use the larger number 5 if you are a beginner. What do all these petersham ribbon numbers mean? Well, it's an old system of talking about the width of a petersham ribbon. I actually prefer to use millimeters as measurements, but for your reference, a number 3 petersham ribbon is 15mm wide, which is this one that I've got here, and a number 5 is 25mm wide. Buy a strip of buckram. This will be necessary to add height to the crown. Buy strips of cinnamon. I probably won't end up using these, but I wanted to show you what they are anyway. matching thread and a lining fabric. Once again, in the interests of sustainability, I've got this old polyester scarf that I don't wear, so I shall be repurposing this for hat lining material. As you can probably tell, I'm not going to be following Sophie's tutorial exactly, and you might find that you do the same if you choose to purchase this book, because when you are working with materials that you've gathered from multiple different places, you're never going to end up with exactly the same hat as in someone else's tutorial. But what about the equipment? Here I have a sewing kit, a steam iron, a pressing cloth. Sophie says either organdy or organza. I don't want to waste any of my organdy or silk organza for a pressing cloth, and as you can see, this clearly isn't a piece of fabric. This is an iron shoe cover that is Teflon coated. I found that this works pretty well. If you don't have one of these, you can of course use baking paper too. Folded cloth or press pad, kettle or steamer, wire cutters or pliers, pegs or clips, tailor's chalk. I have never managed to get on with tailor's chalk, so instead I will either use a piece of leftover soap or one of these handy friction pens. And lastly, some curling tongs, which I don't have, so thank goodness that that's optional. The first step I've already done, which is to remove all the trims. However, I've already been a bit of a bad student because Sophie said that I should have put a pin in where the centre back was, which is where the label would have been, and I didn't do that. But in my case that's okay, because I'm about to reblock this straw because I don't like this flat shape that it has across the top. I want it to have more of a rounded shape, so I'm about to use a dome block and a little bit of steam and some elastic bands just to give it a rounded top before we start the tutorial properly. I have also inspected the top of the hat for any marks of dirt, and there aren't any, so luckily I don't have to do the complicated thing of taking any dirt off. But in case you have a hat that has got dirt on it, Sophie has a whole paragraph on how to remove that. And also, since I'm going to be completely reblocking this hat, I don't have to worry about getting out any dents that there might have been had this been a bit more of an old and battered hat. And the way you would have done that is with the pressing cloth underneath, the iron over the top, and just gently with a little bit of steam you can take dents out in that way. As today is a hot day and this is a very lightweight straw, it's actually almost dry enough already to take off the block. I'm actually going to skip straight to step 13. I know that's a very long way forwards in the tutorial, but don't worry, I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to separate the brim from the crown. I don't really know why Sophie doesn't suggest to do this earlier, but this is just my preference and I'm going to do it my way. Step 13 says to measure up 2 centimeters from the crown line. The crown line is this dented bit you can see here in the hat. The trick here is to not cut through the brim. I'm going to pop my crown back onto the dome block to rest while we go back to step number 5 and shorten the brim. This mess of a brim does need to be straightened out. I might as well, because I have it, pop in a collar block and position the brim around that. I'm going to need to shrink that weave a little bit because I have a tiny head size. That flattens out quite well. As part of step 4, Sophie says that you may wish to add stiffener at this point, and I think as much as I thought at the beginning of this process that this hat was stiff enough, I think the brim could use with some extra stiffener. However, I think the crown is okay. But I know from my experience that you really need to wait for your material to dry before you add any stiffener to it, whether that's chemical stiffener or PVA water-based stiffener. I'm going to be applying my favourite pie chemical stiffener to this straw. I need to do that in a well-ventilated space, so I will pop outside and do that once this brim has dried and cooled after the steam ironing. Step number 5, shortening the brim. Sophie says that you should decide how wide you'd like your brim to be, and that brims tend to be shorter at the back and wider at the front. Sophie's done it straight on the brim. I am a little too nervous to do that, so I have created a template, and with this template I can try it on shorter at the back to see if the proportions suit my face, because if you have a slightly different face shape than me or the model in the picture that this hat is modelled on, then you might find that you might prefer to have wider sides or an even longer front or an even shorter back, perhaps, depending on your head shape and your face shape. So I think actually Sophie's measurements suit me just fine. This is actually quite a nice little brim. I'm going to use my Frixion pen to draw around it. If you've got tailor's chalk, use that, or soap has also worked very well for me in the past. And while I'm here, I'm also going to add a pin into the front and the back at the head fitting so that I know exactly where my place is. When I cut the edges of brims off, I prefer to try and keep a whole circle here because you never know what you might need it for. This can be put into some interesting shape, and maybe we can use this as a trimming on the finished hat. I think that looks rather lovely. Oh, that's a really good size on my head. That's spot on. Right, next step. Okay, so it turns out for the next step you need a sewing machine, which I don't think was mentioned in the list of tools, materials and equipment. And you're also going to need some millinery wire, which I also think wasn't mentioned, but luckily I have it all to hand. Step 7, sew the ends of the petersham together with a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters. And in case you're wondering, I'm using a size 70 sewing machine needle. I'm going to use a standard straight stitch set to between 2.5 and 3 stitch length. Pin the petersham join to the centre back, then pin around the entire shape, working north, south, east, west positions until it holds securely. North, south, east, west is quite a common term in millinery, and in case you're new to millinery, let me just quickly explain what that means. You've got your north, south, which is your centre front, centre back, and then you've got east, west, which are your side positions. So if you ever hear any milliner talking about north, south, east, west, it's just the points of the compass transposed onto your brim. Step 9, start at the centre back, sew the petersham 0.5 centimeters in from the wired edge. Oh, did we put the wire in already? I'm confused. Did we put the wire in? Oh, yes, we did put the wire in. Never mind, I haven't yet put the wire in. I'm actually going to sew in the ribbon first, purely because I don't think I'd be able to stitch it very well on my sewing machine if the wire was there. I think the wire would get in the way of the needle and I'd end up breaking needles. So I am actually going to sew the ribbon in first and then put the wire in. Right, let's take a look. That's, I think, actually worked out rather nicely. Oh, it slightly bubbled my brim up a little bit. The wire should have been part of step 5, but clearly I am demonstrating that I am absolutely inept at following someone else's instructions. As you can see, it's all very, very, very wonky, so I need to take the spring out of it. Sophie sends us back to page 28 for her instructions on that. Now I do this a little bit differently to how Sophie suggests. So Sophie suggests that you start to straighten it out like this, using your thumbs to take the curve out of it, and you end up with a sort of U shape. Whereas I prefer, I just think it's a bit quicker, to use the table and bend the wire downwards or upwards, depending on where the wonky bit is. I think this just goes to show that there is 1,000,001 ways to achieve a similar result in millinery, so you choose your own adventure. And this can seem very tedious at first, but the more you do it, the more you practice, the more you'll get used to it. And while I'm doing this, I might as well answer a question that I get a lot. Lots of people ask me, in my country, I can't find millinery wire, or I can't order millinery wire, I can't import millinery wire. What can I use instead? Well, the answer to that is galvanized wire. So you want to use a wire that doesn't rust. So with millinery wire, the cotton coating on the outside is what prevents it from rusting. Now the problem with galvanized wire is it's not very easy to straighten it. So the cotton covering on a millinery wire is what is going to make it easier on your fingers to straighten out the wire. With galvanized wire, you will need to completely straighten it into a straight line. So it is a little bit more work, but it's possible. Okay, I think that's straight enough. Next, what we need to do is a 5cm wire join. That's easy enough. We've done it so many times before, and if you need a reminder, here's a video on how to do that. Done my wire join. Let's put it into the brim. I've used 1.2mm millinery wire, and I think for a hat like this, that is actually a little bit on the thicker side. Ideally, maybe a 1mm millinery wire, or even a 0.8mm millinery wire would have done so much better. I've made a start on step number 10, which is rolling the petersham to the wrong side. And I'm going to need a needle and thread for step 11, which is to stab stitch through the scalloped edge of the petersham ribbon. I have sewn on the underside of the petersham edge binding. I don't know if I would do it this way again, however I do really like the soft effect of the folded edge here compared to the scalloped edge on the bottom. Usually I would have folded the petersham ribbon manually and sewn it all manually without using the sewing machine, and then I would have ended up with a scalloped edge on both sides of my brim, but this is nice to try something different. Next step is sewing in the petersham head size band. I always find this step very counterintuitive because you'd think, oh, I should finish the hat and then sew in the head size ribbon. No, no, no. You sew in the head size ribbon before you sew your crown to your brim. Sophie suggests at step 15 to sew in the petersham headband ribbon to the brim headline now, see page 30. So if we have a quick look at page 30, measure the inside, pin it down, then stitch it in. I am going to do it ever so slightly differently and add in an extra step. My extra step is to curve the petersham ribbon into a C curve. I do it like this because that's how I was taught to do it, and also how I've seen in other antique millinery manuals, so that's just what I'm used to doing. The ribbon has gone in. It's now starting to look like a proper brim. Let me just try it on for size. Double, triple check that I've got the right size ribbon. All good there. Wonderful. What's the next step? Once again, I seem to have done the steps out of order. The one I've missed is to attach the bias piece of buckram to the crown. So let's very quickly do that. I have been fiddling with this crown and brim combination in front of a mirror for about half an hour, trying to figure out what is the optimum crown height for my face length and shape. However, I then realised that we haven't quite finished with denting the crown into the trilby style, and that's going to change how I perceive the height of the crown. So I figured it would actually make more sense, because I am not familiar with wearing or making trilby styles or fedora styles, that I should jump forwards in Sophie's tutorial to step number 17, called Reshaping the Crown. Now Sophie does this after she's attached the crown to the brim, and I think that would make sense because it gives the crown some extra stability while you're fiddling and moulding the little dimples into it by hand. However, because I'm a complete novice at this style and I don't know what kind of height trilby fedora crown would suit me, I'm going to try and put those dents in now before attaching the crown to the brim. I'm surprised how well that worked. It was a little bit difficult to get the first crease in, but once I'd pinched the front to form the two little dimples, everything just kind of set itself in place. Now I'm still trying to decide on what height to do the brim. This is currently a 3cm extension. I've folded the bit underneath so that I can unfold it if I decide I actually like more height, but I'm tempted to try just a tiny bit less height than this. Let's have a look. Oh, I think that looks better. Yes. You see how that instantly transformed my face and it makes me look just a little bit more like me. Now, let's say you are completely new to millinery and you have no idea how to figure out what kind of height or crown or width of brim will suit your face. Don't worry about that, Sophie's got you covered. At the back of her book, there's a chapter called Expanding Your New Skills, Design Advice and Exercises. This is the only type of section of its kind that I have come across in a millinery book, and I am very excited about this. She takes you through how to draw, how to find your inspiration, themes and research. She also goes through developing designs, including a few bits about colour palettes and textures. If you're struggling with exactly what I was struggling with about how to suit a specific hat to a specific face shape or head shape, she's got a whole section on designing for the individual. This really is your complete guide to millinery. Maybe I wouldn't get it if you're a complete beginner, but if you are moving through your millinery journey and you've made a couple of hats and you want to expand your skills and expand your knowledge, and maybe you can't quite afford to go on a design course, this is the book for you. All I've got left to do is sew the crown to the brim and figure out a way to trim it. I've been playing around with ribbon trims for a little while now and I can't decide exactly what I want to do. This is the part in Sophie's tutorial where you can go completely off-piste and trim your little trilby hat however you want to do, which is sort of the direction I'm going in because I don't really want to do the cinema swirls. It looks very pretty, it's just not very me, so I figured I should try and figure out my own thing to do. I've been busy stitching these 3 ribbons together to go around my hat, and before I go all the way I thought I'd try it on and have a look and see what I think. And actually I'm glad I haven't sewn this up together on the machine yet because I actually think the green is a little bit distracting in the hat. I think it would look better with just a plain white strip in the middle. It's actually been a few days since I last looked at this hat. I've been struggling to figure out what trim will look good against the hatband, which I did manage to finish, by the way. This is it here. I was hoping that inspiration would strike upon me, but no, that hasn't happened. So what does one do when inspiration is not happening? Well, I thought I'd take a look at all the various trims that I have in my cupboards. Sophie's cinema swirly thing slightly reminds me of feathers, so these are hackle feathers, which I think work quite nicely, but I don't want all this puffiness. In addition to those feathers, I've got some peacocky things here. Oh, that starts to look quite nice with the straight line against the hatband. And I've also got some goose bio feathers. These are the wrong colour and they're recycled off a different hat. They've already been pre-curled. That could look quite nice if only I'd had them in white. I also found in my cupboard of things this lovely painted butterfly, which is very delightful, but again, maybe not quite right for this hat. I've got some more recycled feathers here. This arrangement is very pleasing, maybe not with this sticking out in a funny way. These look like hackle feathers to me as well, these brown ones. Maybe I can do something like this, but with the white hackle feathers. Of course, the other options are my favourite berries and acorns. This will kind of be putting the hat into Mary Poppins territory, and I'm not really sure that's what I want to go for. I think the lemons make it too fussy. I'm trying to go for a very classy, almost like a lady journalist from the 30s look with this hat, and I don't think the lemons speak of lady journalist. The last trim option I've got left from my cupboard is something very special. These are little magnolia flowers that used to be clip-on earrings. Maybe this looks nice against the green, which it does, but because we've trimmed the hat with a white petersham ribbon, the creamy yellow tint of the flowers just does not match and it makes the flowers look dirty, so that's not going to be a good option here. These are all the ideas I could come up with using things from my trimmings cupboard, but perhaps Sophie's book has some extra ideas. First off, there's this little buckram and leather angular fabric bow. I really like this arrangement of feathers sticking out either side from a little knot. Another thing that stood out to me from this book is these little leaves. They're almost a little bit like feathers. Can you see here? These are made from cotton organdy and they do have that spiky appearance that feathers do, so that could also be an option. Another way to go would of course be not any kind of berries or feathers, but a little bow. Sophie provides some very good instructions and a pattern on how to make this. I think it's a satin bow. But where does that leave me? I'm still thinking about feathers, so let's try a few things out. I've got these hackle feathers here. I'm going to pull some out. Oh, I wonder if I should take this trim apart and use this brown feather from it. Let's do that. Oh, it's looking a little bit worse for wear, so I will just strip off the feathers from the bottom that look a little bit scraggly. These top ones can be fixed with a little bit of steam and hairspray. So now these ones are curled, the other ones were straight. I'm tempted to iron these flat. I think we're getting somewhere here. How about against the hat? What do you think? I can't see from here. And with some of the black peacock, oh, that's a bit much now. That's definitely too much. I do need somewhere to tuck them in, so I think we should go back to Sophie's tutorial and see how to make that little ribbon join cover. Sophie used the ribbon of her original hat, which is something I was hoping to do, but on second thoughts, I actually don't think the colour of the original ribbon matches the green of the hat particularly well, so I think I'm going to end up doing this out of the same white ribbon that I used on the hatband. I've bound the spray of feathers with a little bit of wire and sewn it into the hatband. All that's left to do is to get the hatband onto the hat and then do the lining. And you know what? The hatband is tight enough that it doesn't even need any stitches to hold it down in place. It's time for the lining, for which we must turn to page 130. I am not the biggest fan of linings, and this particular style of lining is also my least favourite. But in the spirit of following Sophie's tutorial, I'm going to give it a go. Measure the inner circumference of the hat and also measure the radius. Add 3 centimeters to each of those measurements. I've sewn the ends together on a sewing machine and also folded over the top by about 1.5 centimeters and pressed that with the iron. Now I'll move on to step 5 of the lining step and sew a gathering stitch 0.5 centimeters from the top. And I'm spacing my stitches about a centimeter apart. Then I'm going to gently pull on the string and gather it, making sure that the center looks nice and neat. Normally I think that gathered linings look a little bit like a cat's bottom, but actually this one has turned out okay. I think that's probably due to the gather stitches being quite far apart by 1 centimeter, so great tip. All I've got to do now is sew it in. I'm going to make sure that I line up the seam of the lining to the seam of the petersham ribbon. And of course, the fun part is now to wear it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more millinery escapades. You can also follow me on Instagram and support my work through Patreon, where you will receive access to various extra hat making resources. To join, click the link in the description box. I have really enjoyed making this hat. Even though I followed Sophie's instructions out of order, I have still ended up with a very smart looking piece. I look forward to trying out more ideas from this book. That patchwork felt pillbox on page 96 has caught my eye. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye!